All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the PFCC Partners Community of Practice Workshop. I hope you all are well. I am Lindsay Galley. I'm the Vice President of Programs at PFCC Partners, and I am really looking forward to today's workshop. We are joined by Naomi Williams, who will be talking about the Center for Healthcare Strategies Patient Family Advisory Board and, big wins and lessons learned from there. I will pass it off to Naomi in just a moment. I just wanted to quickly introduce our organization for those of you who are new here, and welcome to everyone. All right, so we are recording, and this recording, along with our other archived workshop recordings, can be found on PFCC Partners YouTube channel, which I will happily share once Naomi starts her presentation. And a good reminder for me to also turn on live transcript for anyone who needs it. So live transcript is also now available. All right, so really quickly about PFCC Partners, this is what we are all about. We want to see a health system transformed into one that works with people and through communities as a partner in their well-being. We catalyze system improvements by centering that human experience of health, and we absolutely recognize the critical role community engagement must play for every effort at delivering health equity. As we all know, the healthcare system is very complex. There's millions of people, hundreds of agencies and organizations, trillions of dollars, and so many of those have influences on the care that you, me, and we all receive. Just another quick reminder to please mute your lines as we get started. So this complexity makes it especially difficult to access care that is aligned with your needs, health priorities, and preferences. It is rarely centered on the person and delivered with cultural humility. So this is despite heroic efforts by the best intentioned professionals, medical staff, and care providers, a lot of you on our call today. This system has foundations built on historic racism, and as data is collected and analyzed, we see huge disparities in how care is delivered. They highlight large health inequities across our communities. It's all just to say, this is a super complex system with millions of people involved and trillions of dollars, and more than just doctors, nurses, hospitals, and clinics. So PFCC Partners open space for patients, family caregivers, and community voices to drive improvement in this complex system. We know from these voices are huge catalysts for improvement and systems change. The team has decades here of passionate experience partnering with healthcare systems and leaders, engaging those with lived experiences in their efforts to improve. The space we aim to open is strategic in that they are linked to key levers for change. And the PFA network helps fill that space. In the early years, it was a community of passionate change makers that naturally gravitated toward founder and CEO Libby Hoy's powerful story and leadership. Recently, we asked PFA network members how they got involved, and almost all immediately recall the day they met Libby. But now it is a fully supported system with structures and staff, all intended to be led by patients and families, or patient-family advisors, those members of the PFA network. And the approaches that I'm describing have really been built on all of our own experiences trying to engage with our own healthcare systems and our efforts to get over 800 voices of the PFA network engaged across our health system. So we have a pretty unique understanding of the infrastructure, context, and supports needed for impactful engagement. And this goes perfectly along with our presenter and topic for today. I am very excited to introduce Naomi Williams, who is a PFE specialist at PFCC Partners and also a mother on a mission to help families and caregivers navigate life with differently abled kids. She believes that individuals with special needs can and should lead an exceptional life. Naomi has been instrumental in the development of the Center for Healthcare Strategies Patient Family Advisory Board and is joining us today to share big wins, challenges, and lessons learned from engaging people with lived experiences to inform complex care research. She has also added author, grief support coach, and yoga instructor to her toolbox, all tools that have served her well as an advocate and navigator. So with that, I would like to pass it off to Naomi. Naomi, welcome.
Great afternoon. Thank you so much, Lindsay. I'm so excited to be here with all of you. So thank you all for joining. I see we have some troopers who are joining us from Florida. So thank you. Glad that you are safe. I come to you from Augusta. So the weather is coming up our way, but I'm in a pretty nice insulated hub. So I'm excited to be here with you today. I do want to mention I have a co-host with me. He might decide to join in the conversation. That would be my son, Noah. So we're going to work. I can't mute him and he's eating right now. So if you hear something, that would be my son. So I am excited to bring lessons learned from our work with CHCS. So if you'll go to the next slide for me, Lindsay. Just as we get started, we always like to introduce our ground rules that we do with any, with any group in wanting to promote safety in discussions that we have, and want to do that here as well. So just knowing that we practice active and empathetic listening and sharing, we challenge ideas, not the person. We come into this space to be both teachers and learners. So just as I will be sharing our lessons learned with you all, would love to hear some things back that has worked and or working with you all. We not only take space, but we make space. The stories that are shared stay, the lessons leave. We like to use I statements. They are not defensive. We don't want to put anybody on the defense. If you raise your hand, we've been doing Zoom for 2.5 years. Gosh, time flies. And then work to be present. If you'll go to the next one. So there was a partnership that we had with the Center for Healthcare Strategies and PFCCpartners that was made available through funding with PCORI. CHCS had received a grant to look at creating a research agenda that was patient-centered, a research agenda that is patient-centered for those that have complex health and social needs. If you go to the next one. So as we began forming this relationship and developing the Patient and Family Advisory Board, we always worked to say that we're in this together and to level set expectations. So always going into it with what are the expectations and setting those up front. Being able to embrace discomfort. So even before we had the PFAB established, being able to go through and know that there may be some challenging and uncomfortable situations or conversations that come up. Being able to trust the intent and name impact. Being honest with ourselves and others, acknowledging our judgments and assumptions. And so I'm going through these not just for us in the room, because we set these expectations in different meetings, in the meetings that we have, as well as when we went into the partnership with CHCS in developing the Patient Family Advisory Board. If you go to the next one. So as we went into developing the Patient and Family Advisory Board, we first set up to define what is the goal of the project and to set the expectations. So we had to go through and decide and figure out who needs to be a part of this program. So going through your who, what, when, where, why, and how. So what is this going to look like? How are we going to meet? When are we going to meet? Where are we going to meet? How are we going to make this work? Then looking at what the recruitment process, excuse me, what the recruitment process would be like. So we ended up creating a application, and that was done through Google Forms, and looking for those to share their lived experience and they why they would want to share their stories, and to be a part of creating this type of research agenda. We were working on a short timeline, if you will, at the very beginning, based off of when CHCS anticipated starting to have their work sessions. So we started in, apologies, this is the feeding pump. Oh, I apologize.
You're good.
So we, in looking at the recruitment process, CHCS and their timeline of when they wanted to start their work group sessions, we kind of had to fast track how we were going to do this. Our response was not what we expected. It was very slow in the beginning. And then we ended up partnering with Camden Coalition. We reached out to them, and they did a blast out to their network in the sense of this amazing opportunity to participate in putting your input and helping to develop this research agenda out there. And the response that we got was amazing. So 2 days before our cutoff date, we might have had maybe 4 applicants, and we had space for 5 PFAB members. The response we had was over 40 people to respond, which is huge. And to ask people to be open and vulnerable with strangers on paper is really hard. So to get that kind of response, we were pleasantly, happily overwhelmed. So what do we do now? How do you go from 40 people? How do you choose from 40 to get to 5? If you go to the next slide. So it took over 100 people participating to come up with the finalized research agenda. I call everyone who participated stars. So we had those that were healthcare system leaders. We had those with lived experience, our lived experience experts, providers, as well as researchers. So I want to talk through some of the wins, our challenges, and then our lessons learned. If you go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, some of the wins, we had a huge applicant response, and we ended up creating not just the advisory board, but also created what we called a research community. Because what we didn't want to do was to have these people with lived experience, these experts with lived experience, share and be so vulnerable with us, and then come back and say, thank you for bearing your soul. You're not selected for this particular project, and have a wonderful life. We did not want to do that. And we wanted to be able to have their input, have them be able to help to develop this, have input into the agenda as well, and not lose them. If you can think of a time when you've put your heart and soul out there and you've been turned away, how discouraging that can be, and deflated, and you might become more reserved before putting yourself out there again. So we did not want that to happen. So we expanded the advisory board. We worked with CHCS. We were able to expand the advisory board from 5 to 8. And then those who were not on the advisory board, we invited them to be a part of what we called the research community, and provided opportunities where they could give input into the environmental scan, to participate in the work group sessions, um, as well as give input to the final draft. And that was very helpful and insightful. We had so many active and engaged participants from all walks of life. So really getting a nice cohort or blend, so you don't have just one or two people sharing their experiences and speaking for a whole group of people, because one person is one person. So being able to have um, 31 other people to be able to speak from different experiences from different areas across the country, because what happens in Georgia does not look the same as what goes on in California, that goes on in New York, that goes on in Chicago, that goes on in Texas. So we had a very, very nice blend and active group of participants. There were new connections and relationships built. One of the things that we heard was, we want more time. We want more time with each other. We want to get to know each other better. How can we help facilitate that? And that was a pleasant surprise as well. That's not typical, at least I haven't heard, where people want to sit in more meetings. So that was great to hear, and something for us to think forward as a group going into new relationships, and how can you foster um, those connections and relationships. And at the end, it's hard to believe that we're at the end of the project. Um, but at the end, a comprehensive, well thought out suggestion was put forward for creating a patient-centered complex care research agenda. I must have lost my train of thought because it stops at of. um, but there was a comprehensive, they the PFAB, we called it the PFAB, and I try to stay away from acronyms, but the Patient and Family Advisory Board, they were so active, and what was put forward was so thoughtful, and even down to the last few weeks before CHCS published it, thank you, the Center for Healthcare Strategies, before it was published, still getting some feedback from the members as to thinking of equity, cultural sensitivity, cultural humility, and being able to where is it placed, as opposed to being on page 26, can we move it up further to page 10? I'm fluffing with the page numbers, but just in having those conversations, in the sense of, it's in there, but where should it go? Should it be at the end? Should it be in the middle? Should it be in the beginning? And that's some of the feedback that the members of the Patient Family Advisory Board was able to give and have dialogue. So if we go to the next slide, and if you all have questions as I'm talking, please, by all means, just drop it in the chat, or if you let me get through the challenges, and then I can take some questions if there are some. Some of the challenges, as I mentioned, that we had was selecting the board members, the response that we had. So again, whittling down from 41 to 8 was a big challenge. We wanted to make sure that there was good representation again. So looking at not just the lived experience, which was very important, but we also wanted to make sure that we got good demographics as far as male, female, other, or how somebody might identify gender wise, as well as geographically. So again, we didn't want to stack it where it was all West Coast or all East Coast. So how do you, excuse me, in choosing um, those where we had good representation? In doing that, then you're working in a in all time zones. And that can be very challenging, especially for those who aren't used to um, having to look at Pacific, Central, Eastern. I'm raising my hand because that was challenging for me. I'm on the East Coast. When a time is put in, I don't think to ask, is it a different time zone? I think everybody lives on the East Coast. um, and so the same with our advisory board members, where you live is what is your norm. So being able to get on get into a routine, into a groove as far as the time zones, and then just listing them all out so there's no guesswork as far as doing the math, 3 hours forward, 3 hours behind, if you travel, all of that. So time zones was a challenge at times. Technology. So again, most of us have been doing Zoom for 2.5, 3 years. Um, steer away from 5 a.m. meetings. Yes. I am one who will set an 8 a.m. meeting. Um, Technology is challenging for some. Zoom, some people didn't have computers or laptops, or they had them and they were down. So doing things off of their phone, which you can do a lot from your phone, but when you're sharing agendas, attachments, 30-page documents, that's very hard to read on a phone. Most likely you're not going to read it on your phone. So being able to figure out how to accommodate or how to make it accessible for everyone that was participating. So for one of our members, well, for a couple of our members, there were times where we had to physically mail the information to them. Um, so if you think of timelines, in order to review the materials to be prepared for the meeting, that means you need to get the materials. It's nice to have it at least a week in advance, which means on our end, the Center for Healthcare Strategies and PFCC Partners, that meant we needed to have our stuff together at least 2 weeks before the meeting. So there was just some things that we had to work through, and there was a lot of pivoting, but we made it. And one of the other big challenges was about benefits. So again, we are working with lived experience experts who have complex health and social needs. So several of the members receive um, benefits in the state benefits. So when you're working, if you get additional income, if that pushes you over your threshold, you can lose your benefits. Um, so trying to figure out this fine line of how do you walk that? What guidance is there? As well as when doing the reimbursements, being able to work with those, work with the organization who has experience in doing disbursements. It takes the learning curve off. So that's partly in the lessons learned as well. So those are some of the challenges that we experience. If you go to the next slide. What? Here we go. Here's a break. Happy birthday to our Leos who are going out. You see that down on the right-hand side. And happy birthday to our October people, our Leos. Nope, not Leos. Who are you? You are Virgos and Libras. I got balloons just for you. Here you go. Let's celebrate. I love balloons. You might be saying, Naomi, what does this have to do with lessons learned and creating a research agenda? There's a lot of pivoting that has to happen, as well as building trust. And so, as we worked together over the last 9 months with the Patient Family Advisory Board, we were able to be a part of each other's lives. And that was a way to be able to build trust. I don't know how many soberversaries or cleaniversaries we were able to celebrate, but when we got on the call and just doing check-ins, how everybody doing, and somebody say, this is my 12th year clean, and we're just, celebrating with them because that's a big deal. So it's a matter of learning how to do life with people in a short period of time, but being able to build trust. So for those of you again who have birthdays in September, this is our last day and going into October. Happy birthday. If we go to the next slide. So here are lessons learned, and there are so many more. I could go on and on, but I tried to capture the main ahas. There were a lot. Um, but again, looking at, we're in this together every step of the way. So being able to work with the Family Advisory Board, they actually help to create the agendas for the work group meetings. So looking at saying, does this format seem to flow? Are we asking the right questions? How is the language? That was a big piece that came up, was as far as it being accessible and inclusive. Flexibility is a must. I like to say lived experience experts are professional adapters, because you have to learn how to pivot. And that's the same on our end. If you're on the corporate end, we tend to be more rigid. And so when we're working with projects like this, we have to learn how to be able to pivot and allow for flexibility. Just as you heard my son's feeding pump that went off. We created a charter together, and that was our North Star. And so being able to always come back to that, it's easy to go down rabbit trails and to get off course, or, this sounds like a great idea. We should look at this, we should do this or that. But always being able to come back to that charter as our North Star and say, this is what we're working towards. We can put these other things under a different caveat and come back to that later. Let's focus here. Having a trusted conduit. And what we learned is people really do want to share their stories. And Camden Coalition was that trusted conduit for us. So as I mentioned before, when we first put the request out, we had 2, and then we got 4 right before we were closing application period. And when Camden sent it out to their group, that's when we were flooded with additional applicants. And so being able to partner with those that have established relationships. And so now that we have worked with Camden, we are expanding our network together, if you will. So those from the PFA network are now exposed to Camden, and those who are a part of the Camden network are now exposed to the PFA network. So it's a win-win-win all the way around for everyone involved. Making sure that everyone is a valued member. So again, thinking of those who have challenges with technology and or time, language. And when I say language, the readability. So that was a challenge at times because the language was that for researchers, and that's a whole different language. And so with this project, being able to, it's hard to ask someone, well, what is it that you need when I can't even read what it is that you're asking me to give input on. And so we had partners who were able to go through that and build a bridge. I think of one of our partners, Lawrence, when he saw the environmental scan, we had a lot of discussion around that, and took on the project of trying to build a bridge, or take the environmental scan and put it into plain language. So knowing that every person is a valued member, we had one other member who, she showed up every week or every month. She would take notes to the meeting. A lot of the time she didn't understand she wasn't able to keep up, partly because of technology, partly because of the technical conversation, if you will. But she showed up every week. Excuse me, she showed up every month. I talked to her almost every week. um, but towards the end, her sharing her story and being able, she would go through and tell me what her notes were. And then as she shared her story, we were able to help connect the dots, not just for her, but for the partners, the other partners as well. And so just because someone doesn't talk like you or doesn't get things like you doesn't mean that they don't bring value. We just have to learn how to see how we connect the dots because they are coming with value. As I mentioned before, the reimbursement, part of it, the benefits was a challenge. The reimbursement, what we learned here, PFCC Partners has the experience of doing disbursements and working with, doing stipends with patients with lived experience. CHCS was new to this. So one of the lessons that we learned is to let the organization that has more experience, I shouldn't even say more experience, that has the system set up, because establishing a system is challenging. But they've learned it. It was good lessons learned for them and their finance team, and being able to put something in place, and learning that moving forward. Again, looking at the accessibility, inclusivity of things, the technology piece, the sending of information. If you have those that may be hearing impaired or visually impaired, what do you have in place or can you put in place for that? The feedback interviews were instrumental. There were some who mentioned, again, because we're doing this while we're still, people are in lockdown. Thank you for participating. He's very happy about this part. Um, feedback, they were happy to provide their input, that they were even more happy to connect with people. Some said this was I'll say just shy of life-saving. It got them out of their bubble, bringing them out of depressive states, being able to connect and contribute to something that was so important. Wanting to make sure, some of the questions that were asked is, how do you feel that your input do you feel that your input contributed, and how do you see it influencing or impacting future researchers, research? And a a lot of it was we feel that we made an impact, but we won't know until we see it. So they were invested in the work, and now it's on the others. What are you going to do with the information that we gave you? And that was a question that came up. So they're invested just as much, if not more, in what the outcomes are. So we spent all this time together, we put in all this work. Are you actually going to do something with it? Or are you going to change your mind and do what has always been done? So those were some of the questions that came out of that. So always doing the feedback interviews was very helpful. And then lastly, looking at, this wasn't the last one, but this is the last big aha that came, was the connections. And one of the researchers mentioned in the group, so I have on here parachutes, and she said, we can't just parachute in and parachute out. We have to be a part of the solutions. We can't just go into communities or ask people to participate in things, get what it is that we want, and then leave. So being invested before you go in and working to have a plan of, that your project may have a finite, a definitive end time. So what is the game plan after you spend all this time with this group and they've invested their time and energy? What happens next? And so I have on there the landing pad and what we were able to create, and to share because of the relationships, being able to share the PFA network and invite them to join there, to find additional engagement opportunities, connect with other lived experience experts, share their expertise. What are you doing in your area? What is of interest to you, and have a platform where they can continue to connect. And that was open not just to the Patient Family Advisory Board, but to the research community as well. Those other 31 people who didn't land on the advisory board, but they were able to contribute their time, talent, and expertise. So we wanted to make sure that they had somewhere to land and not just, well, we spent the last 9 months together. Now here you go. Thank you for your time. Have a good life. As well as being able to connect those who had not been familiar with Camden Coalition to be able to connect with them as well. So if we go to the next slide. So again, this is a slide that Lindsay had up earlier just about the PFA network, but the different opportunities that were available. And as you see, the engagement opportunities, being able to create the community, which is within the forums. We actually developed a complex, I think it's called a complex care forum, or complex needs. I don't remember off the top, but created that forum where they can actually go. So again, that's going back to those lessons learned where people are saying they wanted more time to spend with each other and connect. So creating space for that to happen, as well as the skills development. If you go to the next one. So that was a brief and fast overview of our work together with the Centers for Healthcare Strategies over the last 12 months in building the Patient Family Advisory Board. They have released their recommendations for the research agenda, and I think Lindsay is able to make that available to you. So there is actually a toolkit. It has the recommendation. It's a 50-page, so a lot of good work came out of that. And before I open it up to questions, before I forget, I just want to mention the pivotal aha moment, I think, that happened for the entire group was the advisory board. It might have been in February or March, for a work group session. We were trying to figure out how to take a super technical piece. We were talking about measurements. So we're going to have this research agenda. How do we measure these outcomes? And again, the advisory board were the ones to help create the questions and agenda for the work group sessions. The typical questions or measurement types are looking at cost utilization, the technical things, cost utilization. I can't remember what the other one was, but the advisory board had mentioned, what's important to us is our physicians spending time with us. How do you really measure patient-centered care? What does that really mean, and how do we look at that? So being able to create from that conversation and discussion during that meeting, and our meetings were only an hour. So we weren't having these 90-minute, 2-hour, brainstorms. So we got a lot of work done in a short period of time. That they decided to have a panel. So there were 4 of the board members who shared their stories, 2 3-minute snippets into their lived experience. And from that, the discussion happened with the healthcare leaders, with the researchers, the providers, to be able to really begin to look at what is important to the patients to measure, what is important to us, and how do we get it, build it together. And from that conversation, there were a lot of ahas on the researcher side, on the provider sides, because they were able to get a better look into how people live that have health and social complex needs. So I just wanted to add that piece in there. So what questions do you all have?
Yeah, thanks so much, Naomi. I added all of the resources that you sent me to the chat so folks could download that. So yeah, open it up to questions right now. You can put them in the chat box or raise your hand and come off mute and ask them as people are thinking of their questions. Naomi, I had one for you. So I was so excited to hear about, the response that you got from patients and families who wanted to participate in this. And I know that the team pivoted to grow the advisory board and then open up this research community as well. So I'm just curious, was it hard to make that pivot in partnership with CHCS, or was everyone really open to creating this community to allow more patients and family members to get involved? Just curious what those conversations were like and any challenges that came from making that switch.
The conversations were really good. So it wasn't a matter of, there was an initial matter of if, but not for long, not if we will do something more. It was more of a how. And that was because, so the challenge came in, we wanted to respect everyone and be respectful of people's time, and believing that if you're asking individuals with lived experience, if you're asking those experts to participate in something, to where they can be compensated. So just as we go to work and we're compensated for participating in these calls, if you will, if you're on work time right now and you're getting paid, same thing with the others. So it was a matter of working with CHCS more so for them to be able to look at the budget and see how can we make this work. So that meant not so much taking away from the advisory board. It did in a sense, but not in a bad way, because again, looking at that benefits cliff, which we still had run up against. And I want to say it wasn't so much as we were cognizant of it, we're aware of it, but our lived experience experts would ask about it. As far as, how is this going to impact my benefits? So that's a long-winded answer. So again, it wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of how. And once figured out kind of like a pay scale for the different engagements for the research community. And that worked well.
Great. Awesome. And it looks like we have a question from Nadine in the chat. Do you feel those uncovered soft measures were taken seriously?
Thanks. That's a great question. Yes, they were. That was the pivoting moment and the aha moment within the work group session when that happened, when that panel shared their lived experiences. The researchers heard it, were able to ask questions and begin to think. Somebody was saying what all it took for them to get to their doctor's appointments and then what it is that they had to manage. And somebody said, well, isn't there someone, one of the researchers, I believe, asked, isn't there someone who does that for you? Like, no, this is all that I have to do in order to make it to these appointments. And so even in the putting care at the center conference, one of the physicians had mentioned, just a greater insight. And so when you look at the final recommendations that were put forward from the Centers for Healthcare Strategies in this research agenda, you see those soft measurements.
That's wonderful. We love to see that. Nadine, anything else to add? I saw you come off mute.
No, thank you. It's intriguing to me to see the follow through on that.
Absolutely.
So the true piece to that, Nadine, so these are the recommendations, right? So the true piece, and this is what came out from the interviews with the advisory board members, is we won't know if we truly have an impact. If we've impacted this, we won't know that until you actually implement.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where the true test and measurement comes from.
That they made it into the report is heartwarming.
Yes, very.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that question.
We have another great question from Susan in the chat. How did you try to ensure that the people with lived experience who shared their stories were not re-traumatized and that they felt they were respected?
That's an excellent question. I can tell you, we could not make sure that people weren't re-traumatized. What we did do, based off of my skill set, because we were in some sessions and there were times where people were reliving that trauma, and I was able to hear that and intercept it. And so being able to, I hear what you're saying. That is so unfortunate and unnecessary suffering. And it sounds as if it is, you're reliving it. So why don't let's go somewhere else. And so being able to have a facilitator who is aware and can hear that. And the last part of your question was to make sure that they felt they were respected. We did that with we led with intention and set expectations, and that we are a team. So going back to those group norms, if you will, and those ground rules, but everyone had an opportunity to share their experience, their truth. And it was probably set up best at the very beginning, where we were able to just take some time getting to know each other. Even with 8 people, we still couldn't get into everything, but we created time at the beginning of the meetings to hear each other. And I was always available outside. So outside of the meetings. So going back to having a trusted conduit is helpful. And I will tell you, I was seen as, I was told I don't look how I sound and I am corporate. And that's okay. But as I was vulnerable, it allowed them to be vulnerable with me. And so I'm transparent. I am who I am. And that was helpful too. Thank you for that question.
Yeah, great question. And yeah, I think too, being able to have a peer to connect with, whether it's outside of the meetings or just, knowing your own story within those meetings and feeling comfortable that I'm talking to somebody who gets it, and who's going to, implement my suggestions and make me feel safe. I think that that's absolutely key. Another question coming in. Yes, keep the questions coming in the chat. We have about 8 more minutes, so plenty of time. Karen, any ideas to elicit research interest in what we consider the forgotten population, the DES exposed? And Karen, if you want to come off mute and share a little bit more, or to clarify that a little bit for Naomi.
Yes, thank you very much. We've run out of funding from the government. We're trying to elicit more funding. Being exposed to the drug diethylstilbestrol happened in utero. It was prescribed to pregnant women from the 1940s to the 1970s. Initially, it was started with the discovery of a rare vaginal cancer in adult women, 18 years old, but the conditions keep on coming. It has altered it. Perhaps in some people, 200 elements of the DNA. It affects the DES mothers, DES daughters, which I am, DES sons. It's moved into the 3rd generation, and the NIH is now starting to think about, do they need to look at the 4th generation? The NIH and the NCI look at a very small cohort. And being the advocate for the DES exposed, I've got 2,000 some odd members following me, and the things that come out is things that's not coming out from the very small cohort study. So I've got my members saying, what about us? They're only looking at them. We need more research. And we do. Things still popping up. I've got a cardiac condition now. Thank you very much, DES. It altered my ventricular DNA. What else is next? And I call it the forgotten population because the physicians and healthcare providers don't really remember it or weren't really taught about this. And so the ES exposed say, why do I have to keep educating my doctors? Or why do they poo-poo me? Well, I am still at risk for cancer. So you can't be poo-pooed. I have a toolkit for them to take to their providers, and the providers then will throw it away. So we need research. We need research into the 3rd generation, and we need money for that. And we have to get researchers interested, and it's not a favorite of anybody. And there's at least 5 to 10 million in the United States, not counting the 3rd generation.
Mm-hmm.
Also,
Right.
It was given heavy in the military. So I have had a contact in the VA because you'll have daughters, sons, and 3rd generation there as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting question, Karen. And so maybe Naomi, more so your thoughts around, raising awareness for research for potentially the DES exposed or, other diagnoses that need more attention, more research. Your thoughts on, eliciting or promoting that this is something that should be looked at maybe a little further.
Thank you for that, Karen and Lindsay. I would say doing what you're doing in the sense of raising awareness, a part of it is not going to happen until somebody finds it, for lack of a better word, sexy. This is and so being able, if you're able to hitch your wagon to another cart, for lack of a better word. So if you're saying, you're having cardiac challenges or issues and you're predisposed for cancer. So are you able to look into or get into some of that research and you bring up the DES, and then there's a light bulb for somebody that says, oh, this is, my mom or my dad or my sister or somebody, when once it impacts somebody else who is in the field, and it has meaning for them, and or it's sexy and or is bringing a lot of money, then they can go. But can you as you're raising the awareness, are you able to look at hitching your wagon to someone else? Can you get in under a different diagnosis that can then bring awareness back?
Well, I tend to be the squeaky wheel, as you know, I'm speaking at now. Another hidden facet of being DES exposed and are the men that were exposed in utero, and they were bathed in significant amount of synthetic estrogen. And in being the advocate, I have a lot of the men reaching out to me when they hit their 40s and 50s. We've got gender identity issues coming up, and then people really don't want to hear about that. And they did a small study, and they said, well, I've talked to too many people to say, I don't believe it. I'll tell these men, I believe it. I trust your story. And they need that. They need that to hear that they're not crazy, and that the exposure could have been the problem they had. So it's just, and right now, it was given also to women to dry up their breast milk, if anybody took taste. Right now, there's a big problem in Scotland, and they're looking for an apology, just like the thalidomide. The DES population has never gotten that. It was a known carcinogen and detergent, yet it was prescribed to pregnant women. And it was known in 1952 that it was not effective in preventing pregnancy loss.
Right.
And here we are today.
There's a lot of different forgotten populations, if you will. And so it is a matter of speaking up, raising awareness, having others help advocate with you, and knowing that you may not see the results in your lifetime.
I agree. We celebrate
unfortunate.
DES Awareness Week. It was started in 1985 from President Reagan. We honor that every year. And yeah, I send out all the press releases.
Mm-hmm.
Delete without being read.
Yeah. And I think too, Karen, connecting with organizations and communities like, Laura added the Complex Care Forum in the chat, but Center for Healthcare Strategies, other organizations like Camden Coalition, and of course ours, to really find, spaces to have these conversations. But I appreciate you asking and continuing to raise awareness about this. I just wanted to wrap up the presentation, Naomi, with one last question. I'm curious, one of the most insightful or eye-opening things that either you or the research partners learned from an advisory board member or the research community, just one of those things that really stood out to you and that had an impact on the trajectory of this research agenda.
I think the two big ahas for us were the response of applicants that we received. So people do want to tell their story. It's just a matter of having that trusted conduit or that trusted group who can help facilitate that relationship. So people do want to tell their stories. They're out there. And the other was the impact that the stories have. So researchers, providers, when you get everybody in the room, everyone is coming as an expert in their field, regardless if they have letters behind their name or not. And everyone should be valued. And that was seen when we had that panel, and the group was able to hear from the lived experience experts.
Absolutely. And I love that term, experts, especially when you're side by side, rubbing shoulders with experts in research and medicine. So it really kind of puts you at that level playing field and creating a partnership. So I love that. And so thank you so much, Naomi, for bringing this work to the community. I'm so excited for the outcomes. Looking forward to diving into all of those resources that are in the chat. We're happy to share those out as well. But just really appreciate you, Naomi, for taking the time to join us this afternoon. And everyone else, we appreciate your participation and your questions. Please consider sharing the research agenda and all of the information that is in there as well. There's a promotional toolkit if you would like to continue to pass this really important information along. So yes, again, thank you so much. I hope those in Florida and the surrounding states stay really safe. And I appreciate you again for Linda. I know you joined from a Panera parking lot. You're going above and beyond. So thanks for joining and taking your time. There you are. Hi, hope you're staying safe. Hanging in there. Oh, great. Okay, well, thanks again, everyone. And we hope that you join us next month. Again, really appreciate your time, and let's celebrate, Naomi, with those balloons. Yay! All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great Friday and a good weekend as well. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.